Thank you to GameWare Create for being a channel partner. Looking for a Kickstarter game you missed or 3D printed minis? GameWare Create has a huge selection available, all at a fair price. Use the link in the description below to check out all that GameWare Create has to offer. What's up, Rockstars? Today I'm bringing you a review of Wild Ascent: Levon Rising. This is going to be a very big review. There's a lot to cover here, and I'm obviously doing it in a different setting as well. So I'll talk more about that, I guess, on the flip side of the logo. So let's go ahead and run it. Now, before I get into anything, I just want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my YouTube members and patrons. It is through their financial support that this channel is able to be as critical as it is. It's through their support that I'm able to give you this honest coverage of the game industry. And it's because I rely on no money from any game company so that I can bring you my honest opinion and not my wallet's opinion. If you appreciate that level of independence that brings, and you can, there's a link down below to that, and I really appreciate it. If not, though, that's fine too. Totally okay. And I understand a like on the video is more than enough for me, or even just a comment saying, thanks, this was helpful. Trust me, that is huge. It's why I do these videos, because I do these videos for you and not any company. So with that out of the way, this is obviously a different setting. I'm not sitting at a table. I don't have it set up. It's because I'm very late to the review and I want to get this out to you guys. And this is the quickest way I could do it, is not changing my setup and setting up a table. I have a folding table that I can kind of set up and put stuff on. And it would take a lot of time. And also my notes are right in front of me. I'm not able to practice it like I normally am. And so there would be a lot of cuts and a lot of editing time. And I just want to make sure I can get this out to you guys as soon as possible before any campaign is over. And I know you guys are asking for different stuff. So just FYI, that's why it's in this setting. So if you don't like it, I apologize. If you're like, hey, it was fine, let me know. Seriously, anytime I'm doing anything new, I would love your feedback, of course. Now, additionally, I just want to note ahead of time, I did not like Wild Ascent 1.0. It's not that it's a bad game. It didn't do a lot for me. And so I didn't play it enough. And when I do reviews if I felt like I've played the material that I have enough to be confident in what I say. It's because I give real criticisms. And if I'm getting a real criticism, I don't want to say something that's incorrect or that's wrong or lead people astray or do anything like that. I'd like to do my homework. It's why my reviews are typically late. And it's why they're typically 40 plus minutes, as well as the fact that I can ramble. But I didn't like that. So just going in, know that I didn't like 1.0 proper Wild Ascent. It wasn't my kind of game. It just didn't end up calling to me for a variety of reasons. I'll cover a little bit of that in here. Also, I am one of the few, there are others, but one of the few people, I think really the only big content creator that has played both Storm Sunder and Wild Ascent. So I'll be able to kind of talk to that as well, especially because I always feel like Storm Sunder is kind of like an evolution of Wild Ascent in many ways. And I'll get into that a little bit as well. But those are the blanket statements. And then obviously, of course, Levon Rising, the one I played, is a demo. It is a portion of it. There's about 3 fights and then some stories. It's kind of a section of the story, not even from the start, that I was able to kind of participate in for this demo. So an FYI on that as well. Okay, so let's go and get into it. And again, I have my notes right here. You'll see me going through it. I haven't practiced this like I normally do, and I do apologize for that. Hopefully that's okay. So right off the bat, the component quality and art is stellar. It's amazing. I have this bad boy here, and there's no real question about it. You can't look at this and say like, oh, this is not a well, designed game when it comes to its visual presence on the board. It looks great. All the minis are good. If there's one thing that Lazy Squire Games will be known for, and they've made a good point, I'm about to drop him, is that they do minis well. They are very busy minis in the design department. There's a lot of details crammed on them, but it's not like the Kaban saw where there's layers of detail. Like if you look at Anubis from Ankh and Kaman, you'll see that there's like 6 layers of stuff. There's like, well, I have a chain, and underneath that chain is a pouch. Underneath that pouch is my tunic. And underneath that tunic, you can see a belt or something like that. Like there's not like 5 things stacked on top of each other like that. It's just a lot of detail. Everything has innate work and stuff like that on it. But they're definitely many people, but they also have a great kind of art direction there, and you'll see that throughout, especially as they've kind of merged Wild Ascent with Storm Sunder from a design philosophy so that the art and the minis look pretty much the same. Now, as a slight negative, I feel like that robs Wild Ascent of any of its own kind of feel. If you were just to take the minis and the art from Wild Ascent and Storm Thunder and give it to somebody who didn't know either of the games, or even if it was some obscure characters of both, and then you gave it to me, I couldn't tell you which one it's from. The Wild Ascent minis look just like the Storm Thunder minis. The Wild Ascent art looks just like the Storm Thunder art. There's no visual difference at all there. The worlds feel the exact same in that sense. It's very much the same thing. Now that's something you can obviously do, but it also makes it to where I can't recommend Wild Ascent for its theme, and not also recommend, Storm Thunder. If you like this style of mini, like the style of art, you would also be interested in Storm Thunder. They're the same exact, pretty much to the T. I couldn't point to potions from each one and tell you which one was from which. I really couldn't. It's the same darn thing at this point. But they look great. They really do. They're up there. They're up there. They're leaders in that space for sure. Also, the variety of content is huge. Now, whether or not all of it is like the best, content ever, we'll get into, but it has PvP. It has kind of a skirmish army builder style thing. It has a PvE campaign with like a kind of it's not really a narrative campaign, so I'm kind of separating it. I'll separate the review like this too. So there's the PvP, there's a PvE campaign with an encampment phase and stuff like that. And then there is the narrative campaign, which is the Von Rising expansion. So there's really 3 different things and they all play a little differently. So I'll be actually reviewing them separately in here. That's another change I'm making to this review. So, I guess let's go ahead and, get into it. But, obviously a lot of different game modes and content and styles here. So there's the PvP, which I've not played it a whole lot. It's fine. I did one session of it and kind of, made my army. And actually I made the other army that I was going to play against as well, just so that I could kind of get more feel for it. The army building's fine. It doesn't really stand out from any other skirmish game that I had, and I think part of it's because the gameplay it's the same as the PvE gameplay, really. There's like no real difference. It has 2 rule books, but they're 90% the same words and structure in them too. A slight differences, but nothing huge, nothing that really stood out to me. I have a little asterisk on that. It's not a plus or a negative. Part of it is because I haven't had so much experience with it, and that's partly because I haven't felt like I've needed to. I have other skirmish games that I enjoy way more, that either do army building better or that do the actual combat game flow better, have something unique in them. You think like the savagery tokens and hate are kind of unique, and it has elevation and stuff like that. And it also has an encampment phase, right? So it's kind of a similarity thing there, but it's like, well, but this, or Arena has an arena-based skirmish game, just like the PvP skirmish game of Wild Ascent, which is arena-based as well. But they have a lot more terrain and options than that. They have teleporters and actual walls and a lot of variety there as well. So there's that in the flipping, flopping action system there is also kind of different. So there's a lot of other games in that space that I would play over this. It's very much also we do this kind of mode. There is the PvE mode, and the PvE mode, first of all, it has a story, but you would never play for the story. So, like, yes, it has it, but that doesn't mean you're going to play it. But the main draw there is the encampment phase. A lot of people are like, oh, it's like KDM Light or something like that, but nah, not really. It's certainly not as involved as something like Kingdom of Death Monster, but even compared to other ones, I found it cumbersome. So how it works is every single character gets 5 actions they can do. And it's sequential, which means everybody does their first action, and then after that, everybody does their second action. After that, everybody does the third action. But you're also making it to where some actions take more than one action. So you might be spending 3 doing this, and that person might be spending 2 doing that, and you might be spending 1 doing that. And you all kind of have to keep track of it. And there's no real way to do that. You can start using tokens or write it down or do something like that. I would have preferred much more if we just got a stack of tokens and we use those tokens. That changes slightly unless everybody gets 5 tokens, but even then, I would like to just give my 3 and the 2, heal up and go shopping and just not worry about what other people are doing. I don't know. I think they wanted you to talk more, but it just ends up being a very involved process for something that I think should just be more like the game itself, which is fairly streamlined. I'll get into the gameplay as well, and kind of how that plays. But I did not like the encampment phase at all. It was cumbersome. It felt overinflated, if that makes sense. it's a kind of an involved process, and with some self-tracking, there's no easy way to do it on the board or anything like that, and it's just kind of messy, especially once some things take, like some, you have to have two people both do two actions, and I would much rather just discard 4 tokens and do it. Like, just give me some tokens I can spend, like gold almost. I mean, it's kind of the same thing, right? You get the same gameplay effect, by the way, like overall, but, and you could still discuss how you spend it and whatnot. And, it just, I don't know. It was kind of messy. I felt, especially because you have to like do it in order. Just wasn't my jam. But you get like different buildings, and you can upgrade those buildings, and you can sell monsters and kind of do that stuff. But, the only other thing the PvE I think really does is the capturing of animals that you sell. And it's alright. The capturing mechanic's kind of weird because you essentially just try to capture it over a certain amount of turns and get hurt while doing it. It's pretty much it. It's kind of like Pokemon if the Pokemon fought back at the very end, which is understandable, but it's not something that affects the entire game. It doesn't affect really the encampment section at all, except for selling the stuff. And then the gameplay, it's really just kill everything except that last one and then capture that last one. Is kind of how you play it. So kind of meh on that as well, because it's not something like every single game decision is based, like it's not that involved, if that makes sense. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, the narrative. So the narrative campaign is well written, which I would expect nothing less. It's written exactly in the Storm Thunder format. But it's not as epic feeling. I'll get into that a little bit more here and shortly, but it's very much kind of a lower stakes thing. At least the demo that I've seen. Maybe it eventually becomes some kind of epic story, but don't expect it to be some crazy thing where you're on a quest to save the world or anything like that. There was no mention of saving no world in the demo at all. It was very much hey, these characters are gladiators and they don't like to be gladiators. Let's try to escape. And that's the demo. That's the story. I had to summarize it for you. You now know part of the story of Levon Rising. I'll get more into the story in a little bit, so I'll move on from there. So that's kind of the main buckets, right? And my overall kind of opinions on it. But let's go ahead and dive into each of those. So let's start with the PvP. Like I said, there's not really much that I played on there. It's fine. Again, have it as kind of an asterisk. It's sufficient. It didn't really stand out to me. It's nothing I'd pull off the table to play over something like Arena or over something like Hate or over something like, I guess pretty much all of my skirmish games really. The Hate and Arena I think kind of go to it pretty easily because Hate also has an encampment phase and Arena also is an arena based game, and Tenaris is kind of the new one that they're doing there. But so same kind of thing there. And by the way, if you want me to do a versus video, let me know and I'll kind of look into that, because I wouldn't mind comparing Wild Ascent to Storm Thunder. I wouldn't mind comparing it to Arena. I wouldn't mind comparing it to Hate. There's a few others, but there are some kind of direct parallels, I think, to a lot of these. Okay, so let's go ahead to PvE. Like I said, the spinning the actions was kind of cumbersome. I'm going to go and skip over that. I already talked about it. And shoot straight for the narrative. So there's a few things here. First of all, the narrative adds character and purpose to your components. And that's something Wild Ascent really lacked, and I think is something great. They do a really good job of making Rose be Rose and making Drusus be Drusus, and having these characters actually matter, right? Thematically, they have a personality. When you're you always see the giant guy with the axe, and you're like, oh man, he looks super powerful. But when the story makes him out to be this ultra strong guy, and then you play the cards and you only ever see him at max level, and you're not max level, so he's stronger than you, right? That kind of thematic element really improves a gameplay a lot, and that's something Levon Rising I think really does that you don't get from Wild Ascent at all. And it's really nice to see that. Really makes you kind of invested in the characters, so that when you're painting them or when you're just looking at the game or thinking of the game, that story is in your head and it gives context to everything. And that's super nice. We all kind of do that in our heads a little bit, but it's really nice to have it in a well-written story. And so definitely a plus there. I really enjoy that it does that. Now, with that said, The narrative feels kind of like fanfic, and let me kind of explain that. Fan fiction in my mind is not, it's not like a lower quality. I don't mean it like a lower quality. It's written very well. What I mean is the stories that you tend to make up, you already are kind of in the confines of something and you have to kind of fit it in there, right? And so, you're kind of like creating these side stories, right? But a side story is, at the end of the day, a side story. It's like a side quest kind of thing, right? It's like, it's not the main thing. The main thing is like what you're encapsulated in, right? So if you want to have Luke Skywalker go on a quest to do something, that's fine, but he still has to end up at Hoth, right? And he still has to like not know, blank or have not dealt with you know what I'm saying? Like you're kind of constricted by that. And since Wild Ascent came out before, and then they have this like arena game, they're like, okay, well now we need to like add characters to these. Well, let's see why they would do this. And it's, like I said, it's kind of what you do in your head. When you're in this, you're trying to think of, why are these gladiators stuck here doing this? And sometimes there's a little kind of story snippet of like, oh, these gladiators are captured by, or whatever. But either you tend to not care about that, at least I don't tend to read that kind of stuff. But, or it's just there to kind of give you an idea. And so this whole story is pretty much that, at least again, the demo that I've shown, or that I've been shown, but, not an epic thing. Right? Like if you're on Storm Thunder, you're going on an epic quest to, solve this or do this, or there's kind of world changing stuff that really matters. And nothing here really matters outside of the characters themselves and whether or not they're happy in their situation or not. The stakes are just so much lower, right? It kind of feels like maybe a TV show versus a movie, perhaps, right? Or even like levels of like Marvel, right? It's like, oh no, or, DC or anything like that. It's like Metropolis is in trouble. It's like, yeah, well, the galaxy's ending here, right? Like that's kind of the separation here. And what separates this narrative focus from most of the other narratives I've played, whether it's Aeon Trespass, whether it's Storm Thunder, all those kind of stories have this kind of grandiose, epic kind of thing. And this one's like, these dudes don't like being gladiators. Let's see if they can escape. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, it's a story, but am I like really invested in whether or not not quite as much. I tend to like the kind of grandiose things. And that really matters too for story choice, or decisions, right? So, I was not happy with the decision paths that, the Levon Rising had versus what I got from Storm Thunder. Again, I've played demos of both. And I think part of that is kind of that more epic grand scale. So, for instance, in Storm Thunder, you have Adina, which is like a priestess, and she is very much a religious person, and she knows about this kind of world-ending cataclysmic event and is on a quest to stop it. And then you're kind of confronted with these hard choices, like, we need to get in there to try and stop like an occult thing, but because like otherwise people are going to die and the city's going to burn and like we'll go to the Dark Ages again. But these guards who are perfectly innocent are saying, no, you can't go in there. So now you have to figure out, okay, do we just kill the guards? And you're stuck with that choice, and you're stuck with that narrative impact where Adina has to decide, does the means justify the ends? Like, is this quest worth giving up that? Can I still be this religious person and also be like, yeah, we need to kill these guards? There's all that kind of decision process that goes into that because the story's epic, because there are greater things at stake. Whereas the decision process here in Levon Rising was literally a pick three. It was like your pick three color explosions, Mass Effect style. Not quite, but, because the story does diverge, and I've read them all at this point now, but, you really pick, are you Dudley Do-Right? Are you a murderous psychopath, or are you just kind of crazy? Those are kind of your three options. So you can either go around murdering people, or you can go around trying to save everyone, or you can just be a little kind of crazy. And while I know this is a demo, but so was Storm Thunder, right? And Storm Thunder gave me real hard decisions, and it wasn't just I always do good. It was I might even have to do something kind of bad for good, or it at least presents you with that option. This one, not so much. I mean, you can choose whether or not to kill a certain character, but it still very much felt like this is the good path, this is the bad path, this is the gray path. Very much like that. And I think part of that is, again, coming to things after the fact and then trying to like fit things in, versus Storm Thunder, which was built from the ground up for this, right? And it's kind of built into that. And I think that kind of helps a little bit, right? Like again, if you're stuck in an arena combat thing, so the stories you can tell for arena are, only so much, which is why they then have to escape and then maybe go on a grand scale adventure. I don't know. I didn't see that part, but that's just kind of how I felt about it. Let's see. Oh, the removal of the encampment, I think, is a great thing. I already told you I didn't like the encampment of that. In the Levon Rising, you level up in a much more traditional and streamlined way. It's a very kind of quick, all right, let's go to the training ground, let's do this. Okay, let's buy equipment, let's do that. And not this kind of involved process. You literally get your training tokens. Like I said, it'd be great if you just got tokens and spent the tokens. I got 5 tokens. All right, let's go. You get that item. You train up in that level. You get that path card, and then we're done. All right, let's go. Right? It's not some like, okay, so round 1, you're gonna go here, and then you'll be there for 2 turns when you try. None of that junk, right? It's very much just let's go level up and get stronger and get more powerful, and then go from there, which is very good. Really enjoyed that. The rules of Wild Ascent feel a little stretched. It's kind of interesting to compare that to Storm Thunder, because Storm Thunder really is a lot like Wild Ascent, very close. They still even have like the cautious movement and stuff like that. And there's a lot of Wild Ascent in Storm Thunder, but whereas Storm Thunder is maybe Wild Ascent 2.0, Levon Rising is back down to Wild Ascent 1.5. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, there's like facing and stuff like that, and that's still a thing here, but then now you have extra large monsters, whereas before you didn't, so they're having to kind of like add that on top of it. Same as charges, it's like Wild Ascent, but with this plugged in on top. And then also even like multiple monsters. So in Wild Ascent, the only time you had multiple things doing it was, summons, but with this, you now have like these dragons that are like number 1 and number 2, which Storm Thunder does, but Storm Thunder has like a timeline that you kind of build out that shows when everybody's activating. In this one, you activate a card, and now you have to activate 2 different dragons. And so you kind of have to just keep a number 1 and number 2 there, which is, again, just something I did so I could try and keep track of it. And then I guess just always do the first one for it. It feels more tacked on, right? It's very much let's try to take Wild Ascent to as far as it can go. And you really start to see that in some of the interplay there, when it comes to, the naming and stuff too. I'll mention the naming, I think, towards the end, but, it's a stretch, right? It's very much taking that rule set and making a few exceptions here and there to allow for more variety and more things to happen. And I'm all for having multiple dragons attack me of the same type even. I think that's cool. You do that all the time in Storm Thunder. But again, Storm Thunder's activation isn't a single card that just says, this is how you activate, because that's the rules of Wild Ascent. But now they want that rule to apply to multiple enemies where it always only applied to one enemy before. And so you're kind of having to like, well, if you read it this way in the end, I mean, it just felt a little kind of, cumbersome to me. It's definitely felt like an addition to the rules. You see that sometimes in expansions, right? When you get this is Rising Sun, but now it has this in it, or this is Blood Ritual, now it has gods in it. And you kind of get that kind of tacked on feel to it, which can be fine and good. Like I said, I enjoyed fighting multiple dragons, but I'm not going to pretend to say that it feels like it was ingrained in the rules concept from the get-go, because it's not, right? It's very much making it work in that context. The only 2 other things I wanted to mention are the charges. Charges is something they've added to Levon Rising, and essentially what it is you have these path cards, but even if you don't, the charges are used in other ways as well. There's these altars, and charges will appear on the altar. What the charges are, I don't know. Make something up. Maybe there's something in the story that pretends to explain what charges on these altars are, or why these altars are in the gladiatorium, and I don't know. To me, it started to break down the story a little bit, because it didn't make a lot of sense to me why there's altars in the gladiator arena, but whatever. There's like, oh, we got that spiked trap, and also this altar with a charge that'll buff you, and maybe it's just for fun. I don't know. Whatever. Either way, there's these altars, and I'm guessing then they'll appear in the wild as well, so there's just charges okay. See, again, I'm thinking too much about like what Wild Ascent is with the Wilderness plus Arena, and then like, okay, now you have these altar charges that are in both because that's the gameplay. The charges you get to collect, they kind of spawn up every single time. I would have preferred to roll a die, but they have you flip a card and then shuffle it back each time. I didn't like the shuffling back. I would have much preferred to roll. When you do a roll, it automatically reshuffles. Drawing out of a bag would also work too, but whatever. Anyway, you put the charges there and then you walk over them to collect them, at least normally. The reason I say at least normally is because instead of having the rules center and like, here's how charges work, charges are per scenario. So each scenario, every single one that I played, every battle talked about what the charges, how they were acquired, whether or not they were free action, and also what they did, and they did different things each time. Now, while that's cool, it's also still kind of the same thing. So it reminded me a little bit of Starcadia Quest, which I didn't like, where you have objective blue and objective green, and they were different things at different times. Now it's a turret, now it's a this, now it's a that. So for instance, in one of them, the charges were just simply to allow the enemy to resurrect them, or we could use them on our stuff. So to activate one of our guys. So it was really trying to get them and prevent the enemy from getting them. Then in another one, it was that we could take the charges and the enemy didn't really need it so much, but we could put it on our card and get a buffed up attack one off, or choose to put it to pay for a kind of a special ability that we might have. And so you kind of had that choice now. Then there was another one where you had to get them, and you could put them on your card, but it did a different amount. So the balance was different. So instead of a +3 attack, it was a +2 attack. So again, it's the same exact thing, but it's per scenario, and each scenario is different in that. And then there was another one where you had to get so many to essentially get to the end state where you shot a guard or whatever, and you had to get so many on a certain character. And so the action is always go to altar, grab that. But then what you get out of that is different each time. I can see why some people might like this. I was not a fan of this. I much prefer, I think, either just, especially because each one's a charge. Like, why you needed 6 charges to shoot the arrow? Because that's what the game needed, I guess. That's, I mean, like the story, again, when you're doing a narrative story, I much prefer it to really feel like you're just acting out part of what that story is right there. But they have these kind of gamification kind of mechanics that just didn't really click with me, and that it made sense narrative. And so I'm playing this narrative game and it's like, oh, this person has to go shoot this person. Okay, well, first run around and just get 6 charges. You gotta get 6 charges. Or, hey, I soaked up this charge and now it makes me stronger. Except I'm in the second scenario of this, so that was like scenario 3. So the first, the second one gave me +3, but now I only get +2. Why did the charge not work as strong? Because balance, not because of narrative, right? And you could maybe narratively make it that way, but I didn't like it just changing every scenario. I didn't like that charges were different every single time. And I was like, okay, what do charges do now? What do charges do now? Like, I much prefer the mechanic to be the mechanic, and you could twist stuff every now and then. I think that's always fun in a legacy style game or a narrative game or anything like that. Well, now this does this, or I got this buff and now I can use it for this or whatever. And like that's fine. But that's, a build that's in static for you or something like that, or kind of a one-off thing. But when every single mission is that, it kind of loses sense of its purpose or meaning in a rather narrative style game. So didn't really like the charges. Lastly, it's expensive. If you just want Levon Rising, buying Wild Ascent is expensive. It is for what amounts to a shorter campaign, you're paying more money. If you want Levon Rising for the story, and that's what you want, you don't have Wild Ascent, Storm Sunder's your answer. It's cheaper to get into it and you'll get more out of it. This is really only aimed for people who really already have Wild Ascent. Otherwise, you're paying a lot of money for a okay PvP game, kind of a mindless high score style PvE game where you're just like, hey, how many seasons can you survive? Try and get to 10. Without really any meaningful context or anything like that. With an encampment phase that's done in a cumbersome way, that just is, especially because you have to track it yourself, it's just kind of messy. And then a fairly legit narrative game that has some gameplay that doesn't really match the narrative and lower stakes. My money's on Storm Sunder for that. So let's talk about gameplay, because gameplay is big, and it's actually, I think, one of its better things. I know this has been fairly negative, and I am fairly negative on this, but the gameplay, it's fun and simple. It really is. And the combat is really fast and swift, and I really like that. It's really nice just to be able to roll dice, know what I did, and then apply the damage. Additionally, because for the most part, you are fighting one type of enemy per unit, tracking the health is super easy too. Even in Storm Sunder, while it handles it more, you kind of have to keep the number there and then put that on, okay, it's number 1, not number 5 of that type of unit and stuff like that. A little bit more cumbersome. Well, I didn't mind it too much because, again, it still goes pretty fast. When it comes to this, It's actually nice and smooth, and I really like that. It gets slightly to the point where you have to check a few things, because you have your path cards, and you have to check if you're behind them, and then sometimes even if another person is adjacent to them or in front of them, or if they're standing next to something, and then you might have a buff on you that changes, oh, I'm a little bit stronger now, or I do +2 to this. So there's a little bit of that I've kind of always been sketchy about ever since Massive Darkness, when it comes to checking multiple sources. But I never quite had an issue with that. It seemed to go pretty smooth, pretty quick, and really enjoyed the just rolling dice and doing combat. Now, that can be a little random. Wild Ascent, especially the 1.0, is quite random to a big degree. You can have a cakewalk, or you can have a tough time. So, like, for instance, this guy here, cakewalk. I had no issue fighting him, which is always kind of disappointing, right? I didn't like that when I fought the Queen and Nemesis, and I happened to luck out and have a good time, an easy time doing that. Same with this. So, you're drawing cards to activate, and the activation might actually, you could activate the same unit every single time, 5 turns in a row. Or you could have it to where they don't activate at all. So, for instance, we were fighting one of the bosses. He didn't activate until towards the very end. There were several that couldn't activate anymore. He hadn't activated once yet. So he just stood there the entire match, not doing anything. First of all, that's not thematic at all. Second of all, it's really, which again, it didn't really matter when there was no theme, there was no narrative. But now there's a narrative. I'm supposed to be fighting this guy, and he's just standing there doing nothing because I didn't happen to randomly activate him. Until towards the end, he just happened to be lower on there, and I did shuffle. In fact, I made sure partway through, because we were like, did I shuffle this? I shuffled it again. He still didn't activate. He was probably like the next one, go figure, and then I reshuffled. But the point is that you can get him all the way down there, or he could just be up front and all of his other units are standing around while he's fighting constantly. And they can really pick on a character as well, because for the most part, they pick somebody who has like the lowest physical defense. And because that is a dynamic that doesn't change, that person's always the lowest physical defense. In Storm's Thunder, they improved that by having a targeting based off of the amount of cards you have. And thematically, sometimes they'll put more of like a Dina's card in there, for instance. But either way, their target is based off of a person, and that person's fairly random, as opposed to lowest physical defense. Well, if your physical defense is 0 and everybody else's is 2, it's very unlikely, extremely unlikely, almost impossible in some circumstances for them to ever have less. So you will always be the target of that every single time. It's just inherently not as good of a system. This is why I call Storm's Thunder the 2.0 Wild Ascent. It takes what Wild Ascent had, the idea of, okay, let's see what the target is, and makes it better, makes it just better, just plain better. Like objectively, it's more fair. It's less random. It makes a lot more sense than just, let's just attack the statue because it has 0 physical defense, and which weird anyway, but whatever. Anyway, it's magical armor. Every single time. There was a little freaking teleporting worm thing that every single time I almost had to not even read the card that it does, because it's going to appear and it'll be right behind her. It's going to appear right behind her every single time. And if you happen to draw the first 5 cards, which you could do, then the first 5 rounds, you're just killing that unit. And now your person's dead because you happen to randomly draw badly, which is kind of a bummer. Additionally, all dice have blanks. There is no like tiered dice or anything like that. So for instance, I had a character that was rolling 5 dice. 5 dice is pretty good. That could be a +5 to your attack, or it could be 0, and I had to be 0. You can just roll nothing but blanks. And in fact, because you only need the swords to do extra damage, that means that there's even there's even an easier chance of essentially getting +0 damage. So if your base damage is 2, which again, Storm's Thunder has a base damage as well. Again, it's very similar. If you have the base damage of 2 and you roll 5 dice and get nothing but specials and blanks, hope you enjoy your 2 damage. It has 3 defense, you did nothing. That's how swingy the combat can be. It's very swingy. There is not a lot of options to re-roll dice. There are some. You can get some items, you get some of that, but at the end of the day, you're pretty much by the luck of the draw and by the luck of the gods, and there's not really a whole lot you can do otherwise. Again, they actually, in Levon Rising, made this a little bit better. There's even some items that allow you to look at the next few draws of attacks and rearrange them. But you have to spec into that. It's not something natural. It's not something everybody can get. It's not something you can start out with or choose to be that kind of thing. There's none of that, right? It's very much unless you choose to try and not get stronger, but instead fight the luck, which makes you stronger. Actually makes you way stronger, right? But just by reducing bad luck, then you don't really, you don't really, have much options other than that. So, yeah, very luck dependent. The activation order is huge, and I really enjoyed that in the game. So every single round you can, which I wish there was a round tracker as opposed to, you're supposed to track if each person has activated, and once everybody's activated, then the round's over, which works. But a round token is much easier to move, I feel. And it's like you have like a ton of characters. You're like, did I activate number 16 over there? And we're not playing a baseball game here. But anyway, no, it's really nice. And you'll see this, on, any streams of it or anything like that. But you end up, okay, now if you go first, then you'll be able to activate. And when you activate, you give buffs out so you can buff these other people. And then he's already facing a good way here. So if the enemy's facing there, if he activates, he's not going to be facing that way anymore. And you're already in the back. So maybe you want to activate first just in case he activates again. How many times has he activated? And so it's nice to be able to look at not only where you are and what your abilities are, but also where the enemies are too. It might have ended in a really good situation to where if you risk activating later that character that's facing the back, the enemy could have activated and moved somewhere else or faced somewhere else or done something like that. So you're really kind of discussing, the activation order in a really pleasant and strategic way. It's probably the single most strategic part of the game. There's not really a huge amount of, I'm hemming and hawing over this skill. Even when you have multiple skills available, for the most part, you tend to know pretty much what you want to do. And so it's not really that. There's a little bit of that maybe with healing. Healing's probably the only one that's slightly like that, perhaps, but for the most part, you're just going in and swinging and hurting people. But that decision point around when you activate who and where they are, very big there. A huge thing that is, seriously, it's probably my favorite part of Wild Ascent, period. Like, I can pretty much safely say that. I really enjoy that discussion. Best part of the game, best highlight of the whole experience to me is every turn just discussing with the other people I'm playing. Okay, well, you could do this, and kind of having a plan and then having to change that plan when things move and stuff like that. Really enjoyable. Really, really liked that. The characters all feel different as well. One of the nice things is that the characters move different and the characters attack different. They have different defenses and they have different kind of abilities that are kind of nice. For instance, there's a character in Levon Rising that can block. So every time he's attacked, he rolls dice, and if he gets specials, he blocks those damage. That's kind of cool. There's another person, every time they activate, they roll 2 of the, I forget what they're even called. They're for the PvP version, the red dice. And they can give those out as buffs. So they can give somebody +1 speed or +1 damage or, +1 defense or, whatever it might be there. Which again, super cool and it feels different. And then of course they can heal as well. There's people that react with other people. Like there's the archer lady that always has to shoot from the back, and she can pretty much snipe people dead that way by getting a lot more bonus basic damage for being in the back. And then if she interacts with the other guy that can block, whereas if he actually does more damage if he's in the front, which is also kind of interesting. But if he's in the front, or he is adjacent, I think, doesn't have to be front, she does even more damage in the back. So you get a lot of kind of interplay, and you get a lot of feel for the characters that make them feel a little bit different, which is a testament because I didn't feel quite the same level of that in Wild Ascent. Part of the reason I think Storm Thunder allows for that more is because they have the card gameplay, right? Where you can actually, be specializing in, you can deck build a little bit, right? Whereas these characters are very much static. And so it's very important to bake into that static. They always have these skills. They always have this available. That availability feels different. I think they did a good job with it, especially with the Levon Rising one, even more. I felt like just all the characters, very different. And I really enjoyed that. I thought that was nice. Let's see. Terrain is a huge issue here, I feel. So they actually have the exact same style of terrain in Storm Thunder. They both don't have walls or anything like that. They very much have a single space column or half column or, whatever. So you have some that block line of sight and some that give you defense. But there's a few differences. And like one of those is the fact that in Wild Ascent, it's much more simplistic. For instance, to get the buff of defense, you just have to be near it. So if there's a column and you're standing next to it, you have +1 defense. Even if you're standing here and the enemy's standing here and the column ain't even in the question, if you're adjacent, you have the +1 defense. Again, thematically, it's a little bit broken, which is weird than when they shove a whole bunch of the theme on it, right? I'm okay with a little bit of gamification in, especially like a skirmish game or a PvP game or whatever. It's like, well, we like the logistics of this more, and that's fine if it doesn't quite make sense thematically. You almost kind of give a little bit of theme to make the gameplay more streamlined or something like that. But you have all this kind of like terrain that's single here, but you're in this big arena, and that big arena doesn't change. In Storm Thunder, for instance, there was a time where you were in this long hallway. And this hallway has columns throughout it, breaking line of sight constantly. And there's only a little bit of space in there. And then what they do is they have it to where poison darts are like shooting out of the walls, like Indiana Jones temple style, right? And so you're having to kind of like navigate in here to where you can still attack the enemies that are coming from both sides of this long hallway, while also, dodging this so you can get to this like fountain altar thing you can mess with to stop the arrows for everybody else. So maybe you're trying to run through there and dodge them as you go through. Memorable, thematic, cool. That terrain works because of how constricted and how different and varied the game board can be. Wild Ascent never changes. Wild Ascent is always a chessboard, right? It's always just squares and a big square. And so when you have these little tiny terrains, it doesn't work. For Arena also has this, right? Arena has it's a rectangle, not a square, but it's just a square of squares, right? But they have these big walls and they have teleporting things and a bigger variety of terrain and terrain that does a lot more to break it up and make little rooms or compartments or parts like that with those walls, especially, or doors and stuff like that. Arena doesn't have that. It just has single space. Oh, I'm defensive here. Or, oh, I get hurt if I get knocked back here. And that's really it. There you go. There's the terrain. So you can't make that kind of cool hallway scenario. No matter what the story is, you're going to be stuck in this big wide open area with a little tiny terrain inside. And that's because that's Wild Ascent. And that's because that's what Wild Ascent was. It was a kind of a sort of boss battler kind of encampment kind of thing. And now they're trying to do kind of a more story thing, but you're still kind of in that. And even stuff like Oathsworn, right, which also has that boss battle thing, also has walls and houses, and again, a much larger terrain stuff. And you tend to use a lot more of the space. So one of the issues is typically, especially when the main guy you're going after doesn't move, well, you just go there, and that's where you're fighting. There are a few things, like I said, the tunneling worms that can tunnel around where you're kind of chasing a little bit, but there's not a lot of there's not a lot of like, oh, I'm fighting over here or I'm fighting over here. Thematically, it's just kind of an arena and you just kind of skirmish in it, if that makes sense. The terrain is not super robust. There's no elevation or anything like that. And it doesn't really do its job of differentiating this arena versus this arena. It's more what you fight than the terrain. The terrain just doesn't really matter too much. Except, again, when you're chasing charges and you're having to chase over there. That was actually another thing I didn't mention in the randomness is the charges. We lucked out. One of the reasons that one of the missions was we even won is because 4 times in a row when we spawned that for 4 rounds, we spawned the charges right next to each other where we could just get them and be done so our guy could activate. If that hadn't been, that guy would have resurrected more stuff. It would have been a lot longer. We probably would have died. It pretty much changed the outcome of the game based off of that happen chance luck. And it has nothing to do with us. You can only move so far. And so if we were over here fighting this guy, and because that's our target, that's who we're supposed to be fighting, and we had spawned the charges over here, charges over here, we couldn't have gotten there in time. So those would have gone to him guaranteed. There's nothing we could do about it. It's not even a decision point unless you purposely just leave people, I guess, there just to get the charges. But again, at that point, your game is get charges. And I don't want to play Wild Ascent to get charges. That sounds boring. I want to fight, not camp charge spots. But that made the difference in the game. If we had not done that, we probably would have died because he would have gotten that several times. If we had had the opposite luck and had to constantly go over there, we would have then eventually had to just have somebody over there or whatever. But it just, it can very random and not a lot you can do about it when it comes to that because they just randomly charge in certain or appear in certain spots. Just happen chance, I guess. So let's see, not enough terrain. Storm Thunder's better with that. The rule book is still crap. So I reread, because I needed to kind of catch up on this, the Wild Ascent final 2021.pdf. That was linked in the BGG forum somewhere. It's not even uploaded as a file. It's a link in the forum. It's to a Dropbox, but it says final in 2021. This is years later, and it still can't even tell you the basics of how to play around. So if you look on the page and it says activate seekers, activate creatures, resolution. So you're thinking, okay, so you activate all the seekers and you activate all and when you read that, it talks about activating all the seekers. It talks about picking who goes first and all that. And then you go to the activate creatures. And the activate creatures tells you how to activate a single creature. Even though it says creatures, activate a single creature. And this says resolution, next round. But if the heroes went first, then another creature does it. And you're like, what? Wait, so all the seekers go in there, one creature? That doesn't make any sense. So then you look back at the active creatures part and you see that in the second sentence in the middle of the paragraph, it mentions an example of when you might, alternate, or draw one to where you would need to go to the next seeker or whatever, which alludes to the fact that, and literally alludes to it. You have to infer this. It doesn't explicitly tell you that it's seeker, creature, seeker, creature, seeker, creature. Nowhere does it just say that's what you do. You have to infer. To this day, the final is in caps, 2021 manual, and they still can't basically do that. Additionally, they have really, you could tell this was their first game, and that's fine. I'm okay with first game stuff, but they need to redo this, and I'm sure they will. So this is not necessarily a dog on the Levon Rising 2.0, whatever they want to call this Wild Ascent. Hopefully by now they've done that. But it does worry me when they haven't yet for the first one. It really does. I don't like seeing that. I would like to see an improvement sooner than that, at least in PDF form. It's been a while now. You have Ascents, you have Seekers, you have enemies, you have allies, you have gladiators. That's 5 different ways to refer to possibly the same person. That's too, I never understood why they have, these are Ascents, these are Seekers. It's thematic. It's just your player character. What the heck does it, why are you calling it different things? One of the things I fought for in Oathsworn, I actually fought against this because one of the other people playtesting it mentioned that, they wanted to not just have iron, but they wanted iron to be a certain type of that. And they would also have ingots and they would have shillings or what. I don't know. They had all these other, I had to look up one of them. It was some blacksmith term but essentially different portions of that. Kind of like you have dollars and cents and, or whatever your currency is. I was like, no, don't just call it iron. And if I have 200 iron, I have 200 iron. It's like gold or gil or whatever in any video game. You don't want some super complex thing that's unnecessary that does nothing for the game. Just have it be gold. Streamline it a little bit. I don't want somebody to be the banker. I want to play Monopoly. I want to play Oathsworn, right? And they changed that, and I'm very glad they did. I think it's a very smart move, and it makes it to where I'm not, I'll trade you these 200 ingots for this bar. And no. That's dumb. I have 1,600, make it like yen, right? I have 1,600 of gold, and that's how much that thing costs. And so I'm going to buy that. I felt the same way here. It's some things refer to affecting gladiators, which I'm assuming, again, there's no definition here. I'm assuming gladiators means Ascents and Seekers. And the difference between Ascents and Seekers are one's in arena, one's not. It's just whatever mode they play in. And some can be Ascents and Seekers. Just, why? Why do you have 5 things referring to different groups that sometimes are the same and some? No. So it's kind of sloppy in that sense too. And it's still I still had cards talking about gladiators. I was okay, gladiators. I'm assuming the creatures aren't gladiators because we specify that they are Ascents and not Seekers, or Seekers and not, I don't even remember which one goes to which because I don't freaking care. But there are Seekers and Ascents, and the only difference really is thematic, in that one's a gladiator, one's not, I guess, except when whatever. They even had a document when we reviewed Levon Rising and say, hey, just ignore it, everybody's a Seeker, which is thank God, but then, we still get cards that say gladiator on it, so it's I don't know, whatever. Anyway, just a little sloppy there. I'm so I really wish they would have already done the final 2021 version, at least explain the basics, how to play the game. Ideally, that's what the rulebook teaches you. It's still a really bad rulebook. It's not a good rulebook. If people can make fun of Batman, Gotham City Rising, or Gotham City, what? Levon Rising, Gotham City Chronicles, because it's all there. It's just really confusing. This just doesn't even have it all there. Okay, so there's that. Summary. Summary. If you made it this far and you didn't tune out because I didn't confirm whatever bias you have. Wild Ascent does a lot, but I feel there are other things that do it better. It does PvP, but there are better PvP games out there. It does PvE with some camping phase, but there are other PvE games with camping phases that do it better. It does a narrative story, but Lazy Squire Game already made the better game, Storm Sunder. So I struggle to recommend Wild Ascent to you guys because I feel like, hey, do you want really great arena-based combat? Buy Arena or Tenaris. It's fantastic. Really, really good. If you want a game that has arena combat and a narrative story, Tenaris. There you go. You're welcome. If you want something that has a great encampment phase and great skirmish, go grab some Hate. Fantastic. Again, does really well in that regard. Now, of course, there's Seam and stuff like that, but if you just want the same kind of game with a lot of the same similarities of Wild Ascent that plays almost just like it, except for some tweaks that I think improve it, just get Storm Sunder. If you're going in and you don't have Storm Sunder or Wild Ascent, get Storm Sunder. Lazy Squire Game still gets your money. You get to support a developer that you probably like. I think it's great. I think they're awesome. Get Storm Sunder. It's a better product. If you want to get the Storm Sunder, but you only have the Wave 1, and you're wondering, well, should I get the Wave 2 and Wave 3, or should I get Wild Ascent? I would recommend the Wave 2 and Wave 3. To be honest, I would. And because Wild Ascent's just now, you might get it around the same time. I don't know. I don't know how late this one's out versus the other one, but I just feel like it's the better game. It does the narrative really, really good. It does the combat really good. The activation, it makes sense for what it's trying to do more. It just feels like a natural evolution to Wild Ascent, whereas Levon Rising feels like Wild Ascent trying to act like its hip younger cousin, but it's really old or something like that. It just seems like it's trying to be Storm Sunder. Again, they made the art the same. They made the miniature style the same. They made the storybook the exact same, but worse story, worse activation, cumbersome rule book, whereas and rule set too to match the mechanics, whereas Storm Sunder just does all that better. So, yeah, I guess that's my review. If you want Levon Rising, go get Storm Sunder. That's really all I have to say. I know this was a little bit negative. I normally don't do too many negative reviews, not because I don't want to, but because I had to force myself to play this. And normally, if a game is crap, I just don't play it. If I don't play it, then I can't review it because I don't play it very much. I'll play it once and be like, that's dumb. That's stupid. Unless it's the game that doesn't really benefit from multiple playthroughs or something like that. There are some games like that you can do that. This one was rough. I did this video for you guys, so I hope you appreciated it. And really, it made me appreciate Storm Sunder all the more because Storm Sunder is a fantastic game. Really, really good. Highly recommended. You guys can check out my review. I'll probably link it down below for you guys. If you appreciate this kind of openness and honesty, where I actually look at price, first of all, which is kind of nice. Not too many people do that. But also list both pros and cons, because there's stuff to love in Wild Ascent too. Then I appreciate you being here, and please leave a like on the way out. If you have any questions at all or any comments, go ahead and put them down below. I probably will not be doing a versus video. I feel like I covered a lot of what needed to be said here. It's a very long video now, but hopefully you enjoyed it. If you do have questions, though, again, ask them, and I'll be happy to answer. As always, thanks so much for being here, guys. I'll talk to you guys again really soon.